professional geologist in Nebraska and Wyoming, and he started his career at Hewitt Mining and Engineering in 1980 in Omaha and Sheridan, Wyoming. Since that time, he's worked for the Wyoming Geological Survey, North Platte Natural Resource District, Nebraska Geological Survey, Nebraska Department of Natural Resources, the United States Geological Survey, Nebraska Water Science Center. He was a founding member of the Nebraska Board of Geologists and served 8 years. Jim specializes in groundwater surface water relationships, water supply, water resource management planning, and hydrophysical applications. For the past decade, he's been specializing in the use of geophysical data to improve the understanding of hydrogeologic frameworks. I just got electrocuted. Subjects must work throughout the U.S. and internationally. Please welcome Jim.
Hey, boy, you know, the work ethic is amazing, isn't it? She has a black thumb that's probably going to be there for a while. She's trying to make coffee and making us welcome at the same time. Thank you for having me this morning. One of the things I'll bring up this morning is you're going to see a lot of nice pictures and everything. This is not meant to be a techie talk. It's meant to talk about groundwater. It's meant to talk about our resources. And I can tell you, without a doubt, you see my name and Jared Abraham's name on here, because we're kind of the core team at XRI as far as groundwater work goes. But there's a myriad of people that are part of this project, including people that are not part of our company. Dana Devine sitting here, she's been part of this for a long time now. She was originally the Enron coordinator and now is at Conservation Survey Division. You're going to see some of her cross-sections in this presentation today. Katie Cameron's not here, but she's now the Enron coordinator, and she does a lot of work. So the point is, as we go through this, and I'll talk about it as we go through the talk, everything that's been done in the past is used in the present, and it will be part of our future. So let's go forward here. I can get the gizmo to work. There we go. So let's start out about what we'd like to talk about, and I would like this morning to be kind of a conversation. It's not meant to be a lecture, but we'll kind of go through it rather quickly. Why do we want to use groundwater AEM, airborne electromagnetic surveys? Why do we want to use this for understanding groundwater and surface water management in Nebraska? So we're going to go through that. Why? Why do we want to do this? We're going to talk about the history of using this. It's almost a decade now in Nebraska that we've been using this technology. We're also going to talk about an example from the Lower Elkhorn Natural Resources District. That publication is out. It's going to be available through the NRD. We're going to use examples of that and talk through it today. We're going to talk about the recent survey flight that we had just a month ago for the Eastern Nebraska Water Resources Assessment Group, and successfully done. We'll talk a little bit about that because we're in the process of interpreting the data and getting the report put together. I was talking to Jim and Don just a minute ago, and they said, Jared's not here. I said, well, Jared's kind of at home making sure the galley slaves are rolling in the right direction. He goes, I said, no, really, it takes the whole staff and focus to get these reports down in a minimum amount of time, because information that arrives too late to the party doesn't help you in your management. So what about the future of this technology? Just one or two examples. We'll talk about it a little bit, how maybe Nebraska can use this in different ways. And then lastly, we'll open it for questions. As we go through this talk today, if you don't understand something or I'm not clear, raise your hand and we'll just kind of stop and talk about this. All right, why do we want to do this? I did the normal I-80 stroll from Mitchell, Nebraska out by Scotts Bluff all the way to Lincoln like I normally do. And I'm still amazed as I go across the state, and I've been doing it since I started dating my wife in Scotts Bluff in 1977, how much this state has changed. But more importantly, the variability in what you see and what you don't see as far as water and the resources that we have in this state. And I will tell you, Nebraska is a great state for water resources. I've had the opportunity to work all across the country as well as internationally. Nebraska is in good shape And part of it is the people that are in this crowd that work tirelessly to make sure we manage it. Well, what type of variabilities are we dealing with? How about precipitation? I woke up this weekend and it started raining Friday night. It rained all the way to 1 o'clock in the morning in Mitchell. We had 4 inches of rain. Then it turned to snow and I got 10 inches on top of that. And you know what? Everything looks full all across the state. Go back to 2012. How did it look then? You all, I really feel this is a tough act because I'm following Rourke from last month. But he had a good picture on there showing that dry riverbed on the flat. Well, there's a lot of wet right now. So how are we going to manage for the future when we look at these things? We just see the surface, and it's our job, Dana's, mine, other geologists, to tell you about what you cannot see. So how about variability in elevation? You all down here got lots of rain. Did you get any snow? 4,000 feet, we got snow. So what's the importance of that? Well, we had sugar beets in the ground. So everybody's got to wait now another 3 or 4 days to see if these sugar beets are frozen off. So it's not just the water, but it's the elevation change. What about the variability in geology? We're really going to hit this today. The geology on the surface looks pretty benign, looks pretty smooth all across the state. You don't see a lot of surface expression of structure or anything else. But you start looking at the subsurface, and especially when you talk about groundwater, this is where we map those changes and bring them into our knowledge base to manage with that information. Variability in stream-aquifer relationships? Absolutely. Where do streams lose? Where do they gain? Ann and I and many others struggled with this with the first fully appropriated basins report. And we were pretty good all across the state until, guess what? We hit eastern Nebraska. And what's the problem there? Well, covered glacial till. And we're going to talk about that today because that's our recent project. But the important part is, how far from the stream could we go? And we had some of the very best minds looking at this from CSD and elsewhere. And basically the old maps of mariners said, beyond the edge of the world, there'd be monsters. I absolutely guarantee you the glacial area for groundwater management has monsters. So we're going to identify them and learn how to do that, deal with that. How about variability in aquifer recharge? We're going to talk a little bit about that today. Because recharge is ultimately how we end up with far greater amounts of groundwater than we do surface water. And that groundwater reservoir that varies across the state is where we can put water into our water bank, quote unquote, by managed aquifer recharge. We start to decide how we're going to withdraw from that bank, how we're going to move it around as we need it. So that's a big deal, is looking at aquifer recharge. How about variability in aquifer characteristics? All sands are alike. Water flows through it, all alike. My experience in groundwater modeling is groundwater modelers do the best they can do with the information that they have. But ultimately, unless they have direct knowledge of the subsurface and the aquifer characteristics that go with it, they have to sit there and make model runs until everything comes as close as possible to their representation of the natural system. Some of the things you'll see today is we're able to go in and add additional information so the groundwater modeler can focus on more, let me back up. Groundwater modelers can focus on some other parts of the model, such as ET, etc., and not worry so much about time to be alive. That's just to name a few. We haven't talked about water quality. We haven't talked about any of these things. Base flow from the streams and how that changes over time. But you all know most of this stuff, and this is what we're going to go through today. So again, why do we want to do this? In Nebraska, this is super important. Nebraska has great information. Go to some of the other states. I'll give you a really great example. California. No, it's not a joke. We were looking at a project out there, so we said, well, we'll go to the test hole database. Can you access that information in California? No. Why? Because in the 20s, they passed a law that all well registrations are private information and no one may access them. So, imagine if you're building a groundwater plant in California. Nebraska has this great information, and at the top of the list is CSD test holes. Being one of those people that was out there on the drill rigs in the 80s and 90s and working with Jim back there, I can tell you, nobody does it like Nebraska does. There were some pretty bright guys back in the 40s and 50s and 60s that taught us our craft. And that craft is now going to the next generation, and Dave's going to teach the next generation after that. So, CSD, it seems to be a little small in the university right now, but let me tell you, it has a big, big footprint. You can go there, you can get their information. When we do our work with CSD information, we don't question it. And then we do, and we find some changes, don't we, Dan? Because this new information gives us a different idea of what's going on. But it's the CSD test holes that aren't touched on. In our registered well database, you're going to see a couple maps here. The important part there is Nebraska's done a good job of registering its wells along with all the information that people may need. Stream gauge program, soils maps, many water and geology publications, groundwater and surface water quality databases, just to name a few. So the bottom line is, so why do we need more information from AEM survey? Why? Well, let's go through that. With the variability across Nebraska and resources and the information that we have, the bottom line is we still continue to need better and up-to-date information in the subsurface. We're asking more and more from our management scenarios, our management questions on how do these things actually work. We want more precision. We want more accuracy. Well, when you interpolate between test holes, limited information, the classic is the sand hills. 20 miles between test holes. You can't really tell what the variability is. The other important part is, from riparian groundwater and surface water areas, all the way through to how much groundwater in storage, the only way you're going to get there is understanding the hydrogeologic framework. It's the only way. You've got to know how far that water moves continuously to and from a stream. Or, one of the questions that was back early when we did the North Platte NRD management plan, how much groundwater you guys got in storage? That was one of the questions in the law. There is no way we can answer that question back then. But we have a way now. And lastly, let's look at an example from western Nebraska on Western Canal. So, excuse me, I gotta take a quick break. So Western Canal, we mapped this when I was at the USGS, and what you see here is in the green is where the aquifer material is. In the tan colors, it's non-aquifer material. It could be clays and silts or rural outcrop along the edge. Up here you see some terrace gravels that are up there on the ridge south of I-80. This is where Western Canal dumps back into the river by Ogallala. It actually diverts up in Colorado over here and comes along. And what you see here is I-80 and the Platte River system. So one of the reasons we did this for South Platte and Twin Platte NRDs is at the time they were wondering about managed aquifer recharge. Where do we take excess flows like we have this week? I happened to talk to Kent Miller. They're out getting agreements right now with Western Canal to divert water into the system and store that water in this aquifer materials. So, would you put a managed aquifer recharge project right there and these number of acres right there? Of course not. But you do want to target where the green areas are. The next thing is time of travel for managed aquifer recharge. You put it in this area right here where it's hydrologically connected to the river. You can see the aquifer materials are directly under the Platte. It goes really in a short time from there to the river as base flow, as discharge. But if you put it up here in the corner, it's not going to travel directly across, looking at the water table and etc. It's going to have to follow these coarse materials back to the river. There'll be some drainage to little streams in the area, but mostly it's going to follow it back. So the longer life for that managed aquifer recharge is on this west end. So this is how you use these maps. Could we have drawn this map with test holes? Sure, if we had a whole lot of them, but we didn't. And I would invite you to look at our publication from the USGS on this and show how the framework, the bedrock elevations, etc., changed once we put the AEM in. And what we did is answer a question for twin cloud. Where would some of the better places be? So, why do we want to use this again? Along the flight line, AEM provides a greater density of data points. It's almost continuous information. So you can imagine them as virtual boreholes. We take a sounding about every 25 to 50 feet, depending on the speed of the survey that we select. We put that information into a 2D cross-section. We fly multiple lines, and then pretty soon we can come up with 3D maps. So that's how we get to bullet number 2 here. We can do that. We can show you in 3D our best estimate of how the aquifer materials exist in relation to one another, to streams, and how much material is in it. The data is compatible to go, it's X, Y, and Z information. It's literally almost like a spreadsheet, but you can take that and put it right into groundwater models. The visualization really helps you with the groundwater, surface water relationships along the streams. You can see where there's groundwater systems there and where they're not. You'll see clay zones. We'll look at some of this with the clock. The other thing is you have detailed 2D and 3D maps of source and sink areas as far as recharge goes. So if the water falls on the land like it did this week and most of it's clay, it runs off. But if you have sand at the surface and it's continuous down to the aquifer, that's a recharge rate. The detailed survey is one of the best ways for an engineer to decide for new municipal water system. Town of Madison, in the last couple of weeks, I believe, has drilled a new well up in Lower Elkhorn on the AEM work that we provided them. So, other things that are important, you can start analyzing your water quality. You can look at siting your drill holes and aquifer tests. Matter of fact, CSD is doing that right now. They're going to go out on some of the flight lines we've collected, and they're actually putting some of their test holes based on this information. All the data are collected interpreting using multidisciplinary information. What that means is we use everything. I invite you to look at one of our reports. We look at everything out there, including water quality, so that we understand what the system is that we map. The general public can use this in Google Earth. When the NRDs get it and they choose to release it, we've already built Google Earth applications that they can click on it, go along the flight line, click, and on that farm they know how deep it is to bedrock, etc. What that information is. And most importantly, efficiency. It's about 25% of drilling test holes to get a similar amount of information. Test holes will never replace what goes in between, like the airborne does. So, whoops, I went too far. So, let's talk about what it is. Nice introduction. Tell me how it works. Some of you have seen this, so we'll go through it pretty quickly. But the important part of this is it's designed to map the resistivity of the rocks, and then from that we compare it to the lithologies in the area, and then that way we get a three-dimensional image of the subsurface. There's a high density of data points. It's non-invasive. We don't have to go on anyone's land. Airspace is free in the United States. So there's no problems flying over folks. Folks' places or anything else. It's no different than if a crop duster went out and flew low to the ground in certain areas. It is the power of a cell phone is the signal that comes out of that big, huge contraption. When you read it on the ground, it's not the power of your cell phone. It's cost effective. It's designed to cover large areas quickly. And I'll show you one of our plans this spring and how it worked out. And with the systems we're using, depending on which one we choose, we can see down to in excess of 1,400. So how does it work? It flies along. This is the gizmo right here. Here's a cartoon of it. Basically, it sends a electromagnetic signal into the ground. It reacts with the rocks, and then the rocks report back. One of the analogies I use is the rocks are sitting here, this is a cell phone. It calls down to the rocks and it says, where are you and what are you? And it answers back. That's a simple way of looking at it. You want to get techie, I'll turn you over to the geophysicist. They'll drive you insane. But it works. So as we go through this presentation, where you see resistivity plots, reds are related to the coarse materials, sands and gravels. Blues, silts and clays. So that's the important part there. So here's how we make sense of this. We take everything and plot it up, boreholes, all the AEM resistivity sections. We look at water quality. We take everything into account and put it in a 2D section, and we see how it lines up. And in these cases, it matches the boreholes very well. Where the reds are resistive, those are sands and gravels. Where they're blue, they're either silts or clays or salt water. So this is an example that's basically out of a textbook of how this works. And these are the people that, over the last decade, we spent a lot of time working with folks in Aarhus, Denmark, because they built their systems to map groundwater systems. So here is an example from Clarkson of a result that we had a couple years ago for Lower Elkhorn when Clarkson was running out of water. This is bedrock in the background. The oranges and yellows here are where the sands and gravels exist at depth. Where you see this in places, except for right here along Maple Creek, there's an excess of 200 to 300 foot plus of glacial till. It's one of the thickest areas of glacial till in the Lower Elkhorn NRD. So we're seeing through that, we're identifying where the aquifers are. The town then understood they had a limited aquifer in 2012. That's why they saw the decreases in water levels that were just really fast and really deep. And they had a limited aquifer, and that's what they were pumping out of. So, the history of AEM in Nebraska, we really got it started in 2007 with the NROP. We did 3 target sites in the state. And from there, we went out to western Nebraska, North Platte and South Platte NRD, then back to NROM, then back to the North Platte and South Platte NRD. We got some funding from the USGS and did a little short sandhill study. We did the USGS Western Nebraska study, 2010, 2011, U.S. Army at Meade, and then 13 and 14, we really hit it hard in eastern Nebraska. Total flown, 15,000 line kilometers, or almost 10,000 miles of air one. So in eastern Nebraska, here's a map of where we've flown. This year, we flew, and you'll see this again, this is the 3 by 3 mile grid and a portion of the Lower Elkhorn NRD. The NRDs are in the background, so the green here is the Lower Elkhorn, and of course the other NRDs are throughout this area. The light green here is NROM flights that we flew this spring. The kind of reddish color here is rust color, is what we flew last fall for NROM. And then all these red squares and strange shapes, that's where we've flown previously for the NRDs. So quite a good coverage in eastern Nebraska. Let's look at some of this stuff. So western Nebraska, we flew a couple of test spots out by Hyannis in the Sandhills. One was at Jimbo and one was at Dickinson Ranch. Then heavily flew the North Platte River Valley, Lodgepole Creek, and then the South Platte River into Twin Platte, North Platte, South Platte NRD. So, Elkhorn River study. Let's kind of graze through this. Where we flew is up here in Pierce, Wayne, and Norfolk. We also flew the flight for Clarkson, and then with the original NROM, we flew a township over by Oakland. So here's where we flew in 2014, the fall. The blue lines are the 3 by 3 mile grid that the NRD asked for. The green line is the NRD boundary. And then the long blue lines that have great separation, those are the reconnaissance flights that we did for NROM. How does it go? How fast is it? Here's a timetable of what we flew in what order and how fast it happened. In 7 days, we've collected all this information, including the 3 by 3 mile grids. We used multiple airports. We had 1 weather day. It's not unusual for us to collect 250 miles a day. So it goes very quickly, it's very fast. But it's not just flying the grid that we set up. You also have to look at the information. We go 24/7. When we fly, we have geophysicists working all night and crews working all day. And the reason is that helicopter costs $15,000 a day to fly this system. We want to know they're collecting good data before we release them. So our guys are looking at totally meaningless data to you and me. These are all the different bands of what you see. But the important part is they are looking for this, where they blank it out. That's interference from power line or pipeline, etc., or just plain bad data. They come up with a percentage and they figure out what's useful and what isn't. And every day they do that. And we make a decision on we refly or continue on with the current plan. So the idea is to get the best cost-benefit ratio and not have to tell the company to come back and fly again. Background data that we use, here's all the CSD test holes that we put into the Lower Elkhorn work and the NROW work. Here's all the registered wells from DNI. Busy place, a lot of things going on. But I will tell you, the DNR test holes, and most of the geologists that have worked with this, maybe 10, 15% are really pretty good as far as lithologic descriptions, etc. So this is the crown jewel right here. Best information available. So how about historical cross sections? They're out there. Having worked at the division, I knew where some of this stuff was, and so we went to CSD and we said, we know all these cross sections exist. How do we get those, put them into our work that we're doing for eastern Nebraska? Well, we dug up hand-draw cross sections, we digitized them, colorized them. This is something that CSD was very helpful with. They provided access. Our team did a lot of the digitizing for all this. So now all of this information that was in paper form in somebody's drawer at CSD is now available to the public. And it always was, but now it'll be part of these reports. You can go right through it and get it. So how important is this? Well, you take these different cross sections and you get a general feeling for what the subsurface geology is. One of the things that we looked at and noticed right away is it generally a pretty good fit, but here's one of the newer cross sections here, and here's one of the older ones. As they come together, they don't always fit exactly. And part of that is it's different authors, different information at the time they were drawn, etc. So what does the AEM do? It'll come, excuse me, we will fill in between here, and we'll be able to smooth these out in the future and know what is where and what type of mythology. The other thing is okay, you told me you mapped resistivity. Big deal. What does that mean to me? Well, you have to relate it to the rocks. And we've always done this, but for the recent report, we went through and did a very rigorous statistical analysis. If you want to know all about that, I'll get Jared or one of the other guys on the phone. But the important part here is we looked at 39 CSD boreholes. We looked at 209,000 individual measurements, and we came up with a statistical profile with different colors that go into the interpretation, hydrogeologic interpretation. We're starting to move from resistivity to interpretation. So blue, from 1 to 12 ohm meters, it's just a measure of resistivity, is non-aquifer. So when we look at these upcoming maps and cross-sections, when you see the blues, it's non-aquifer material. Marginal aquifer, that's from 12 to 20. Principal aquifer is 20 to 50. And then coarse aquifer materials beyond that. So the principal aquifer is basically where you're going to find your irrigation wells, all your high-capacity wells, where the best aquifer materials are to yield water. The marginal aquifer, we're very confident that it's going to relate to sand and gravity. So let's look at a flight line. We're going to zoom in. This is Norfolk, so Highway 20 is up here. We're going to look at this one cross-section. It is both for Enra and Lower Elkhorn. So here's that resistivity. Make sense to you guys? Takes a little bit of work. So we go in there and we start laying out boundaries. And the other thing is we bring up all the test hole information. It's all part of those databases that you get in these reports. And then we start making our hydrogeologic picks. This is not as useful for the general public as this is down here, which is the interpretation. Remember our colors: blue, next to no aquifer; tans are marginal aquifers; yellows, principal aquifers; and over here by Pierce County, you see some of the coarser zones in the principal aquifer. The other thing that's interesting here, you see this orange line right here. That orange line is the contact with the Ogallala Formation, the Quaternary sediments up above. The Ogallala only exists over here on the western end, in this section of the study area. And you notice that this orange line kind of cuts through this blob. Well, we had a lot of discussion with Sue and Katie and others, and we looked at that and we said, we're not buying that CSD, and this is straight from the CSD cross-section. We're not buying this as the correct pick. So we spent a little time talking about it. So this line is going to be moved on the CSD cross-section to incorporate a different geometry for what's there, based on the AEM. And the reason is we had plenty of test holes, and if you follow where the Ogallala picks are on the test holes, it makes sense. You add in the AEM, now you've got enough information to understand it more completely as a natural system. The other thing that's on this map, the CSD 1995 water table. As you can see, it flows from west to east. And then all the bedrock units. We're seeing approximately 1,400 feet here. This is the Dakota. And this is something that's out on the horizon here for us. We're seeing more and more that people are looking at the Dakota as a water source. But you may ask, why is it two colors? Well, because in this section of the Dakota, and we don't have hardly any test holes, so it's difficult for us to really characterize it. But what we do know is where it's this light green, it's more resistive, and that makes it fresh water. If you put saline water in this, it's going to look like this. So we know that the water, based on the resistivity values in previous work, it can't be this color if the sandstone is the same. And it's a mix of sandstones and shales. We can't separate them all out. Down here, it could be saline water or shale or whatever. We just don't know. So if you were exploring for water in the Dakota, you'd probably look in this area. So let's do a quick close-up and talk about the impacts that we talked about before, why the variability matters, and why we need to understand these things. This is the creek by the airport. Just fell right out of my brain, I'm sorry. That we flew out of. It's north and east of North Wayne. Yes, thank you. Too much travel. So the airport's right about here. This is the floodplain. This is the non-aquifer material. Here you have marginal aquifer. Here you have good principal aquifer. You can see it's not very extensive. We really exaggerated it and blown it up. We have good test hole control, so we understand how this happens. This is a fine example of hydraulic connection to a stream. If you look at this and you go along from where it's principal to marginal, and then it hits basically a no-flow boundary, because this is silts and clays and hills, and then directly underneath it is the Carlisle, which is a no-flow boundary. It's bedrock, it's a shale, no water gets through it. You have this very limited area from the stream that a groundwater model would be effective in predicting depletions, connections to other areas in the groundwater model system. This is the variability that's important to us as groundwater managers and surface water managers, just how big of an area along this stream is affected by pumping or basically base flow, etc. So let's back up a second and look at it in total now. It was this section right here. So we know this is pretty isolated, and there's alluvium along the stream. But how about up here in Pierce County? How do we follow this out? Well, pretty good aquifer, pretty good what? Gets into that marginal aquifer, but it's still hydrologically connected. There's not a boundary condition that you can see. Then you get into principal aquifer again, principal aquifer all the way over here, and then you hit this snow flow. So if you put wells in over here, it's not going to reach out this way. If you have wells over here, it can reach this other direction. So it's the connectivity of the subsurface and how you set up your management areas where the wells are and where they are not. This was the information that the Water Roundtable was looking for. So let's look at it with all flight lines. I like this. As a geologist, I look at visualization. I like to see patterns. And so Pierce County's up over in here. This is that area by Wayne. This is the creek that we just talked about, coming down through there. There's that zone. So the important part is when we look at this, glacial cover all the way to right here. And if I was going to draw a management area, I could throw a rope right around this right in here and say this is very different than this area here. Then you look at this, and all of a sudden you can see that that's different also. So this gives you a visual interpretation of some of the management areas that you can work on. And I'm running a little bit long, but this is just a different direction looking at it. The important part is when you make a 3x3 grid, all of a sudden you can start thinking about your management area. So, Google Earth files, these are available as part of the report. You click along the line anywhere and you get the same information, water table, elevation, top to the different formations, etc. So the conclusions are very useful for groundwater management. I'm going to speed up because I just noticed we're a quarter till. The principal aquifer is thicker in the western and southern third of the lower Elkhorn. The quaternary and tertiary act as the principal aquifer in the west. The aquifer, non-aquifer aquifer materials are abundant in the central and east. And the full thickness of the KD is revealed in the AEM survey. So, AEM collected elsewhere in the LENRD. Besides what we showed, here's Clarkson. Here is Oakland, that was one of our first projects. So let's look briefly at the Clarkson survey. These were the planned flight lines for Clarkson. These are the completed ones. You see they're a little wavy and they had to go around houses, towns, etc. What do the results look like? You've already seen it. We were able to map the principal aquifer. Not only that, with the volume, they had 108,000 acre-feet of groundwater in storage. So, that's a pretty valuable number for this area as far as development. So, eastern Nebraska, this is all pretty preliminary. You saw most of it in the previous slides that I gave you, so we're not going to go into great detail on the northern end, and we just don't have a lot interpreted for the southern end, so we'll kind of cruise through this pretty quickly. This is without the 3x3 mile grid. It's not as intuitive. If you look at this, the patterns don't show as distinctly. It's good to know where this information is. It focuses our ability to have future studies and where extra work needs to be done. But I have a difficult time picking out a pretty continuous pattern. The 3x3 mile grid seems to be pretty good for regional management purposes. The close flight lines, like you saw in Clarkson, which are 400 meters apart, that's where you get the detail as far as aquifer storage, etc. So let's kind of go real quick to this spring. We flew 684 miles. There was 11 flights. This is where we flew all the way down into the Nemaha NRD, very close to the Kansas border, was the furthest south. Flights went very well. I will say, working with the NRDs, we were really inventive in our flight line. The pilot was very good, but boy, I'll tell you what, it makes life interesting. So let's look at a couple of simple preliminary resistivities. This is coming through Lincoln to the south. Again, one of the things that's happening here is bedrock is more near the surface the further south you go. On average, about maybe 60 feet of quaternary material on top. A lot of places the rock's outcrop, so I'm not even going to talk about interpretation, except for, you can see the variability here. That's the important key to this slide. And then lastly, again, this is that north-south section going south, but whoops, but this is the fun one. Let me back up. For a geologist, it's the fun one. Sorry, folks. There we go. What's wrong with this picture? Dana, what's wrong with that picture? We have an amazing fault right here and here. We have a dropped block in the area. So, and we're talking hundreds of feet of displacement. So this is something that the geoscientists all just jump up and down and go, wow, look at that. We can show you right where the faults are and where they aren't. How does that help me with water resources? If I was in this area of hard rock and little off-per material, I'd want to go into these crumbled zones along the fault lines and see if maybe we could drill into those and see if there's any good water. The other thing is, these deep sections, Jesse Corse at CSC went up and observed a hole drilled by Omaha that went 1,000 feet. They got fresh water at a pretty good capacity out of the Ordovician. Pretty amazing. So we're actually seeing some of that stuff that he drilled into. Again, just another example of how things vary. You can tell by the color patterns that things are different. I promise we'll have a report out by June 30th and we'll explain all this stuff as best we can. But the important takeaway here is this is fresh off the press, just a few weeks old, and we're already looking at it and seeing all of these changes. We'll interpret them and get back to you. So that's about all I really want to say about that because it's so many. Lastly, future of AEM. This is something we did in Lower Elkhorn that was part of our work and Sue Lackey's. This was something that we had a test system from Denmark and we flew it on our nickel just to see how well it would work for stream mapping. And this is south and east of the town of Norfolk, so this is the flight line. These sites that you see are sites that Sue did doing the geoprobe and permeability tests. This was part of some of the work that we designed back with fully appropriated basins. And what we did is we mapped electrical conductivity, her estimate of hydraulic conductivity, her lithology log, to the AEM section. And this AEM system was very shallow. Saw it about maybe 200 feet, 300 feet down at the most. As we flew, we found some paleo channels we didn't know were there. You can see where the aquifer of the Elkhorn River exists. It matches very well with the test holes. So the bottom line is that's the tour for eastern Nebraska. There's a whole lot more to talk about. That's what I have. I'm happy to entertain questions. And a lot of people to thank for this. It's not just XRI.